Hello, my name is Tracy Rogers, and we're on the couch with Dr. Crystal Benjamin, a marriage and family therapist. And in our last segment, we were talking about trust and betrayal and how it shows up in relationships and how it can really break a relationship. And in this segment, we want to focus on rewriting the story. I want to ask you first, why rewriting the story? Why that phrase?
Yes, that phrase actually comes from narrative therapy. So it's just an approach to looking at things. So you can language it however you feel comfortable, but in terms of rewriting your story, it's quite common amongst persons who are thinking that, your story, it's really based on how you tell it. It's the same story, but the perspective that you look at. And for creatives, they may really latch on to that type of analogy. So rewriting your story, as I mentioned, your story is your story. But it's really how you tell it. And how you tell it is based on the emotion surrounding the event and how much work you have done. So, for example, if you've been traumatized by maybe a family member, your father wasn't around or your mother wasn't around, the way that you tell your story can really share or demonstrate if you've worked on it, if you're able to see the strengths and the positives from it, or if you're still in that seeing the negatives of how it has negatively impacted you. So
when you use the lens of narrative therapy, which I love, and so narrative therapy, you talked about sometimes we get stuck because we have a problem-saturated story. A story is just about the problem.
Yes.
And we live in and through the stories we tell and imagine about ourselves. So sometimes we're not living in reality, but we're living in a narrative. That thing in your head, because as human beings, and I've talked about this in other segments, that your brain actually rewards you with a little bit of dopamine anytime you complete a loop. Anytime you say, oh, beginning, middle, end. And your brain doesn't really care about if that story is accurate. It cares about completing the loop. So that's a little bit about joining narrative therapy and thinking about that from a neuroscience perspective as well. So we have this problem-saturated story. Think about saturation. It's just bleeding the problem.
Yes.
He or she, they were unfaithful. You lied. You broke my trust. That is the problem.
Yes. And you keep retelling the story from that lens, not recognizing there's probably another lens to look at the story from, in terms of what you've learned, in terms of human behavior, what you've learned about yourself. What are some of the differences or things that you could have done differently, etc. And it just reminds me of another way of looking at it in terms of Gottman, and he is one of the leading research experts out there, and he would talk about that 5-to-1 ratio, mentioning that couples need 5 rewarding or happy moments to combat that one thing. So it shows that if you continue to tell your story with that problem-saturated focus, then you're not able to move forward, you're not able to thrive. But if you're able to find those positive things, if they're there, because there are relationships that need to end, let's not,
And sometimes ending it is the best thing you can do for yourself.
Exactly, for both of you or yourself, because you need to look at yourself and what's important. But there are relationships that are doing well, but because people are so focused on the negatives, they can't see the other great things that are surrounding. And so we really talk about knowing that in relationships, betrayal may happen unintentionally or intentionally. And if you and your partner decide, hey, I want to move forward and I want to make this work, we encourage you to rewrite that story.
You have to release the story. So that whole thing, and we know that, I remember a writer reading once that for every argument, you need to have like 5 intimate moments just for your brain to register what it got from that disturbing movement. Just for it to register it in comparison to what it got from the goodness. So there was infidelity. We've talked about, I have decided I'm staying in this relationship and making it work. But when I keep telling that story, I'm living in that spot. My brain is there. And our brain is connected to our body. So I've said, we're moving on, but every 5 minutes, what she wears, and you was with so-and-so.
Comes up.
Look how you walk out of your shoes and you was with so-and-so. But you have made a decision to stay. So if you've made a decision to stay, then you need to make a decision to work. And let go of that story.
Yes, and how do you and your partner work with each other to make that happen? And that's where the work is.
So let's give our audience, what are the 3 things you need to do to get ready to rewrite your story?
Yes, that's there are 3 things. There's one, you need to be aware of what your story is. And some persons, they kind of put it in the back of their mind.
Yes.
They're telling it, but they're not really telling the entire story. So you really want to bring it to the fore, what this story really is.
I wanted to cut you there because, like, if we use infidelity, for instance, we know that infidelity happens because of the person who was unfaithful, not because of the person they were with.
Right, exactly.
So if you tell this story that so-and-so was unfaithful because there's something that I lacked, that way that you're telling that story, this person made a decision, and they made a decision because of deficiency in them, not because of something that I did.
Exactly.
So just tweaking that story helps you to look at it in a different lens.
Right, exactly. So that's why you really want to bring the entire story to fore, and not your interpretation of the story. As much as you remember about the story, then you start rewriting by thinking, if you were to take this other person's name out of the story or the negative aspects of the story, what would be left of the story?
Ooh.
Yeah, what will be left if you take that aspect out of it and really sit with that? And of course, the best way to do this is with help, because
that's magical.
Yeah.
What would be left if I take what he or she did? What am I left with?
What are you left with the story? So you work with that, and then from that extraction, then you could rebuild. What have you learned about yourself? What great things? What great future you have? What are the 5 positive things that you pulled out of this for this one negative problem-saturated situation? So it's really a process that it works best if you do it with someone.
And as I re-author that story, I now say, this happened.
Yes.
It's now in the past.
Yeah. You're not
it's
going to...
not present tense, and it doesn't mean because it happened again that it happened before it will happen again.
Exactly.
And then sitting again, you're bringing the point home, sitting with someone who can really step back and hold that together. So we know when we work with couples, we hold the relationship. You know why to do the work, we're holding it. So you work on you, we'll keep it together.
Yes.
So and you need that
space.
person to do that. And a professional who could take you through that process is one of the best things that you could do for yourself.
Not necessarily family or friends.
Not necessarily family or friends. And people go, and I tell people all the time, divorce is really expensive. Invest in counseling. I love that. Divorces are expensive. Try and do the math.
Yes.
Take the time. Find someone who can walk with you through that process. Thank you so much, Crystal. We have been talking about trust and betrayal and rewriting our story after that has really shaken our relationship. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. Take care.